Everybody. Welcome to this guest speaker series about coronavirus and COVID-19 in the hotel industry. We're very lucky today to have a very special guest. I'll leave Miss Sheridan to do the introduction. Before we start, I'll just need to ask everyone in terms of housekeeping, if you could keep your microphone muted. That will be so much easier for everybody to hear and understand very clearly the presentation. Also, if I can ask, we will have a Q&A session at the end so that we can fully listen to the presentation. So if you have any question while the guest speaker is presenting, please feel free to write a comment in the box below here where you're seeing people saying good morning, and write your question there. Don't worry, just be patient. We'll wait until the end of the presentation in order to respond and answer all your questions. So don't be shy, feel free to write your question away and we will read it out at the end of the presentation in the Q&A session, okay? Ms. Sheridan, over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Carla. So good morning once again, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you so much for all attending the guest lecture session today. It's really wonderful to see so many familiar names on the call today. I hope you're all doing really well. In terms of the guest lecture session today, as Ms. Carla mentioned, we have a really wonderful guest lecturer. His name is Mr. Joshua Dowse, and he's the Director of Food and Beverage for the Sheraton Grand Sydney Hyde Park. And he is here today to share some insights into the realities of a quarantine hotel and to also discuss some more information about COVID-19 and the current industry climate. So can everyone please give him a very warm virtual welcome. Joshua, over to you. Thank you.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. It's very well received. So Joshua Dowse here, the Director of Food and Beverage for the Sheraton Grand Sydney Hyde Park, and joining you virtually. So generally, I've done a couple, guest lectures, therefore, now with hotel schools, but generally I'd be face-to-face within the classroom, but today we'll join you via computer. I can see I've got a little bit of a filter. It makes me look better than I do, so that's great. And I've also changed my background too, so we can, change areas there, which is pretty exciting. Now, we'll jump through a little bit of background about myself before we go any further. Sorry, just... having one computer technical. Perfect, there we go. We love technology. So a little bit of background about myself. So I've actually been within the hotel industry for just over 10 years. I won't give you the actual figure, but certainly have quite a bit of knowledge across various different areas within the hotel and also cruising industry as well. So it's always, I think, best to just plant the seed and just give you a little bit of background about myself and what I've done throughout the progression. So I've actually been with Marriott previously for around 8 or 9 years. I first started my career at the Brisbane Marriott Hotel. I actually started as a food and beverage attendant part-time. So I guess that's exciting for the future hoteliers within the industry, that pipeline progression, particularly within this industry that's evolving and at a fairly rapid rate. So yes, we've got a bit of a hurdle point or a speed bump, whichever you'd like to call it, which is COVID-19. But the industry will be back and strong. And there's been a lot of messaging from Marriott International in particular that hotel signings, redevelopments, and also current structural, for example, in the current Sydney market, we have the W Hotel, which is still continuing progressing forward. And we're looking at, I think, a 2021 opening now. We've also got a new hotel in Melbourne as well, so Melbourne Docklands. I believe it was initially scheduled for a December opening, potentially Q1 2021 now. But I guess the clear messaging is that the industry will be back and stronger than ever. We just certainly have a bit of a change within the current economic stance, but there are still great opportunities and continuously evolving, which is exciting, I guess, for people that are progressing within the current hotel market and people that are currently studying to become hotel managers, or all the various other attributes and industries that are associated as well. So whether it is PR, marketing, or the various other attributes. So please don't be confronted by the current COVID crisis. Certainly is an interesting development for us all. And at the end of the presentation, I will give you a bit of an industry insight into what Marriott International is looking forward to and some of the ways that we are actually currently changing service elements, and particularly cleanliness and touch points and different ways that we are actually starting to now look at the guest journey and the ways that we need to be proactive in response to this change within the industry. So back to myself, so part-time food and beverage attendant at the Brisbane Hotel for around 8 years. From there, I actually grew quite dramatically. So within that 8-year period, I went to a captain, which is around I guess, operational management trainee, which we call here at the Sheraton Grand, supervisor and assistant manager of banquets. From there, coming through to assistant manager of restaurants, and then progressing the field. I had the opportunity within that pipeline to actually transfer across and do some work within the Service Paradise Marriott as well. So then from corporate through to leisure, and then from there, it was within the catering event space, a great opportunity to continue and evolve. I think one of the bigger shows we looked at for catering events was the F111, which actually sits on the footprint of Service Paradise Marriott. So the racing track is just there, and we did a lot of the after parties. Particularly one that's within my immediate memory would be the Porsche Super 8 after party, which was pretty exciting. We had jet skis in the pool, fireworks, and various other things. And it was around $200,000 spend. So quite a beautiful show, as you can imagine. From there, I actually got poached. So I jumped across to the Treasury Brisbane. So for those of you who know Queensland or Brisbane quite well, so that's a casino-based operation, and they do separate into two halves. So you've got the hotel and then the gaming. So from there, I was actually the hotel food and beverage operations manager, looking after the hotel side. So boutique style luxury accommodation. Attached to that, we had what was at that stage the laboratory, which is around a refined dining experience. Very much won over its degustations and all around that culinary sensation. Separate to that, we had a lobby bar, catering and events, and also in-room dining as well. So I was within that role for around a year. Certainly quite exciting and interesting to see how a casino operation works, which once again is quite different to a whole hotel-based organisation, because you do have the gaming component and they do work hand in hand. I took a short break, and then from there had an opportunity to actually work with Princess Cruises. Now, look, I know they haven't got the best PR rap at this stage, but let me tell you, they do actually run a very tight ship, and they're actually an incredible operation to work for. And they have various tiers within their fleet as well. So Carnival Corporation is the mother base, so it's the umbrella company. And then underneath there, you've got various sectors. So everything from P&O, as we know in Australia, Carnival. You've also got Seabourn, which is their ultimate luxury. So they're smaller, I guess the definition between a super yacht and a cruise liner. And then also you've got Princess Cruises. Princess Cruises, I was the assistant director of food and beverage. And from there, worked within various ships within their fleet. And everyone from the smaller vessels, which are around a 3,800 passenger, which is quite large when you look at it, up to around 6,000 passengers when we look at some of their larger business models. So again, really large style operations, and certainly an exciting time. That role actually took me global. So I was actually based in Los Angeles for a period, but from there would actually fly all across the globe, dare I say. So my initial assignment was actually based in Southeast Asia. So home port of call was Singapore. From there, we would do various terrains out into the islands, across to Langkawi, Malaysia, and various other touch points, and come back. From there, we actually changed itineraries. So we jumped across over to Japan, which was quite exciting. Very interesting culturally as well, as you can imagine, jumping through from Southeast Asia across to Japan for the cherry blossom season. But certainly interesting to see all those cultures and associations there. I say it was a big change because when you think culturally, for me, it was a bit of a shock when you are actually converting the ship, because there are various touch points and requirements that you need to adhere to, particularly when you're starting to play within the Japanese market. We talk within hotel industry about being China ready, but also Japan ready as well. So you've got to think about the cultural attributes, in particular, making sure that each room has slippers, access to green teas, some of the cultural requirements and some of the service critical touch points and some of the respect measures too. There's also the language, which is once again another, I guess, challenge in its own right, but certainly something too exciting to work through, and translation. Remember, we had a couple of buyouts of the fleet, of the vessel itself, where we actually had 100% Japanese speaking guests on the boat at any given time. So remember, I actually had a translator standing right next to me during the entire time to be able to communicate to the passengers. So quite interesting. I called it the fishbowl approach, where I felt like I was in a fishbowl and I couldn't really speak out to the guests. From there, I wanted to return home. I was really missing my family and I wanted to come back to Australia. And so I had the opportunity to work for IHG. So that's the Intercontinental Hotels Company. Crown Plaza, they actually wanted me to come across and join their property on the Gold Coast. So they were going through an interesting transition during that time. My family is actually from the Gold Coast, so it was actually a really great opportunity. I remember they were calling me whilst I was in Dublin, so I think we're making calls around 1 a.m. in the morning to go through that conversation. I had the opportunity to connect and eventuate when I was back in Australia on a break to be able to pop down and have that conversation with the property, and then I transferred across. Look, I wasn't there for too long because they did actually have pipeline progression and are looking for a larger role for myself, and had the opportunity to actually open Hayman Island. So that's a property branch under the Intercontinental Hotels Group. It's one of their prominent halo luxuries within the Asia Pacific region, and unfortunately has recently just closed for a short period due to the coronavirus. I remember speaking to some of my fellow colleagues there about the impact of something of that nature and what occurs there. So a bit of, I guess, to get an industry insight there, they've actually ceased, as I'm sure you're across domestic travel, and imagine how that affects some of our remote-based destinations, and something as luxurious and a pinnacle destination like Hayman Island, when guests actually physically can't get to the region. So flights are generally across to Hamilton Island and or the port of Proserpine, and from there transferring across via vessel to the island itself. So certainly a huge challenge in its own right there. And I know they've got a crisis team that is still on property at that stage, because it is still a running, breathing island, and there's the various touch points that need to continue there too. So look, it's upsetting to see that they have had to close, but certainly they will be scheduled to be back, as we all will be once we get past the current coronavirus pandemic. But back to the operation of opening, which was quite exciting. So I was part of the pre-opening team, and that experience there was, probably one of my highlights within the career. So being able to curate and put together such a dramatic scene of culinary activities. So we had 5 restaurants and bars across the entire portfolio, everything from, approachable dining experiences beachside to refined dining looking over the Pacific Ocean. So really beautiful destination. And once it opens up again, certainly would encourage you to come across. Now, my partner is actually based in Sydney. So as you can imagine, being in a tiny remote-based destination, it's around an hour, an hour and an hour and 5 minutes via vessel across from the domestic airport, which is on Hamilton Island, can become a bit of a hurdle point. So we were looking at moving to Sydney. And then from there, I actually had some conversations with the Marriott Group, which has led me to my current position at the Sheraton Grand Sydney Hyde Park, which is once again, one of the flagships, or is the flagship for Marriott based within our region, and an incredible property. We've got over 500 rooms in total. Food and beverage in general based industry would be around $28 million worth of revenue drive alone within food and beverage. So it's a really large based operation. We've got venues and also catering mix there. So everything from our signature feast dining experience, which focuses on seafood, to our famous high teas down in the Gallery Tea Lounge, to our award-winning catering and event spaces as well, which really are really one of the forefronts of the operation here too. And then of course with the 500, just over 550 rooms that we do have, in-room dining again. So certainly really large-scale operations within that space. But today is about coronavirus, so COVID-19, and how do we actually convert the business model to be able to look after quarantine guests. So on the screen here, I've put together a draft timeline of what effectively our initial first wave look like and what the actual guest journey mapping does look out during their progression. So the guest joins us for a period of 14 days, 13 nights in total, and then from there, they're actually quarantined here on site on property. For the initial wave, so some insight there, when the government directive put a play that restaurants and bars were to cease trade, I think we only had a 12-hour notice period from memory. It certainly put the industry into a bit of a whirlwind. We weren't sure what to do and how will we be able to continue our service structure, and what does the legislation mean, and how do we continue with current trade? Obviously cannot. So we did actually have to cease a major share of our services. From there, the main standpoint that did continue was in-room dining, obviously looking after our in-house guests, but outside of that, all other venues did actually have to cease, which meant that a major share of our workforce was actually stood down for a period of time. From there, we actually had a very short timeline or a notice period when the third-party provider that's actually working in close proximity with the government to engage in what we call quarantine guest travel was associated. We made the connection. We placed a bid out in the market, and we actually were quite successful and achieved that. We're quite favourable because we do actually have a large inventory holding, which is great because you can really centralise a lot of your resourcing. We also, like I stated, with that business pipeline that we do have currently, we do quite well with catering and events. So from there, we could actually do on-premise catering for quarantine guests that would be housed here on property, which is quite favourable for the government. So from there, we actually were successful to be able to receive that bid. The timeline that you can see, so in the first wave, we actually only had around 24 hours worth of notice to be able to brainstorm and come together, really to put a plan in play to understand how effectively we would be able to produce the service execution. And it's very different to a normal based guest experience. So really was taking a step back and having a look at guest mapping, what it would look like from a pre-arrival perspective to what would be required once the guests actually arrive here on site. And then we need to think about how do we look after those guests during that 14-day period as well. So lodging included 3 meals per day, so breakfast, lunch and dinner. We would need to obviously deliver that to the guests direct. And we also need to apply social distancing measures to be able to provide a safe working environment for all and to ensure that we don't actually have that cross spread in the instance that one of the guests actually did have COVID-19. And it's essential that we did have those safety measures in play. You can see from there, you've got day 1 up to day 14. And through this presentation, we'll touch on each and every one of those key points. So you talk about the arrival experience. So the international arrivals, and that's what we were housing here on site. So obviously domestic travel had started to wind down during that period. And to take a step back, fortunately for us, we'd already placed in play some mechanics associated with quarantine, particularly when we had guests that actually arrived from international travel across to the hotel. We did have directive from the government that they would need to quarantine themselves or self-isolate, which was the initial terminology, for a period of 14 days. So it wasn't something that was regulated, and it certainly wasn't something that had military presence and or police presence. It was a self-isolation. But once again, we had started the mechanics already around what would a self-isolation look like, how do we service those guests, and how do we make sure that we minimise contact with our associates, so our workforce here on property, with that guest in particular. So I guess this fast-tracked that process and made it a little bit more focused towards legislation and certainly having that government body and support and assistance when it became a mandatory requirement once you arrived in the country. International arrivals. So initially it was via general light itineraries. From there, we've had charter come across as well. The reason why I do highlight that is based off your general flight itinerary. It wasn't quite clear of the numbers. So we weren't really aware, which is a bit of a caterer's nightmare, of how many guests would be arriving and how many guests would be arriving to your hotel. So certainly something that we do need to adapt and continuously work with what a guest's arrivals would be coming through to your property. The schedule, or I guess the way that the manifest works is that each isolation hotel would actually fill to capacity, and then from there you progress through to the next property. They'll fill to capacity, and then it continues on from there. So it's very unclear or hard to understand or know when you actually be receiving those guests. But then once you do start to commence the arrivals process, you do realise that you will actually fulfil and actually hit your 100% occupancy, which is great in that area there. So a bit of a waiting game initially. So international arrivals, they're actually screened upon arrival at the airport. Any symptomatic travellers are actually separated by the New South Wales Health, and they wouldn't actually be received by the hotel. They'll actually go to a separate facility. Generally, they'll actually go direct through the hospital and be tested for COVID-19. The guests that aren't showing any symptoms, and so currently in general health, would actually proceed through to the hotel, so ours in particular, and then upon arrival would be greeted to the hotel. So the way the process works is when the guest actually arrives at the international airport, they'll go through this screening process, and look, depending on the length or the amount of guests that are actually arriving through to the airport, it could take anywhere up to 3 hours as they come across. From there, they jump onto charter buses following the social distancing protocol and arrive here on property. Now, the check-in process is very different to the normal, as you can imagine. So rather than obviously arriving in the hotel lobby, going through that standard guest experience, there's obviously different protocol and processes that we needed to follow. And also PPE, so the personal protective equipment, to make sure that we really do look after our associates here and ensure that we are understanding of the key measures required, because COVID-19 is certainly something that we needed to be very conscious of, and to ensure that all is safe at every time, any given time. So guests would arrive, and then from their social distancing protocol would be adhered to. So there was mapping associated there. Rather than checking in actually direct at reception, they were checking in down in one of our function facilities. And fortunately for us, we do have quite a few and quite large footprints as well. So the 4x4 square metre basis was easy to adhere to. From there, when the guest arrives, we needed them to provide us some various details. So their full name, their address, their phone number, their date of birth, their current email address. We'd provide them with their room number. We need to identify their bus number and also their primary residency as well. So that's important for the post-departure, understanding where they actually need to, or their intention is, or their final destination, particularly once they hit the 14-day cycle, because the international flights are actually coming across, landing direct in Sydney, but perhaps some of your guests need to continue their journey to the final destination, which could be Brisbane. So it was important to really understand the mapping there and how we can further assist and support these guests. Also, date of birth too. So we did actually have an eclectic mix of guests here on property. There were a couple of minors during that period there too, and elderly. So once again, it's important to really make sure we are looking after those guests in particular, and they may have different needs associated there too as well. Now, the interesting part is the guests aren't actually provided a room key. So obviously, based on quarantine, the nature of the guest experience during the quarantine process is to stay within a confined space during that progression for a 14-day cycle. So they're not actually to depart their room at any given time. So an escort was provided through police and or military, and that actually escort the guests up to their room and actually allow them entry, and then from there ensure that they're settled, ready to go, and then from there the door would be closed during that period of time. We would provide them with arrival kits, and from there we give them a bit of a mapping and understanding of what to expect during that 14-day cycle. So everything from the menu plan to really understand what this would look like during the 14 days. Meal time, so it was an allocated meal time for the lodging of 3 meals per day, so breakfast, lunch and dinner, and they had specific timings that they would be dropped off as well. So it's interesting from a psychological point of view. It's important that we do provide those guests routine so they understand what to expect, particularly when you're in a confined environment for such a long period of time. From there, the New South Wales Police and Defence Force would continue to support the hotel as well. And we also had additional private security guards allocated on each floor just to monitor to make sure that the guests were actually staying within quarantine during that period of time, and also a sense of security when our associates are coming up to the level to provide that delivery of food and or beverage. Now, the delivery mapping. So as stated, as part of that arrival kit, the guests would actually be given a letter and give them all the details on what to expect with the hotel, understanding the facilities and services that are able to be provided to them during this time, and to give them a little bit of a sense of normality. We also needed to make sure that they were understanding of some of the reduced services provided, and then understanding some of the processes and procedures that we wanted to place in play to ensure the safety and security of our guests. So the particular one that you can see on our screen is around the delivery mapping. So within the letter, we did advise that as part of the arrival delivery process for food and or beverage, the associate would knock on the door 3 times, and we'd request that they kindly allow 10 seconds before opening the door, just to ensure we didn't actually have that direct contact, and we could apply that 1.5 social distancing protocol in play for the safety and security of our associates at all times. With the delivery, again, associates were requested to be wearing PPE. It was mandatory at all times. The PPE that we provided were gloves, face mask, and optional goggles if they'd like. Now, I guess it's important with that side note there to note that the protocols in association with quarantine cases and was a precautionary measure only. In the instance that we did actually have any guests that started to show symptoms and or signs of COVID-19, they'd actually be removed off premises. So the risk associated was quite low. So I think it's important to mention there, but it's a precautionary measure to make sure that because there was a form of contact or where we're within close proximity, that we did have a safety guard for our associates at all times. And in the instance that any of our associates did feel uncomfortable during that time to be able to provide that service, it was optional, and they could option not to deliver the food if they felt uncomfortable at any given time. And then, of course, you've got the collection protocol. So, very different to the normal process where in-room dining would be delivered. We would place a card and come and collect it from the room. This one we're actually providing with the guests was a rubbish collection. So the guests were advised that at the end of the day to leave all their rubbish or bags outside of the door each night for a mass collection, and that collection time was at 8 p.m. That collection would be completed by housekeeping and would be quite systematic with its approach, so level by level and a clean sweep. Associates were instructed not to enter the guest rooms. As you can understand, it's a quarantine-based situation where we're really trying to contain the guests during that 14-day cycle to make sure that they're COVID-free, or in the instance that they showed any signs during that time, they would be taken off-site. Associates, once again, during that rubbish collection, would be wearing PPE at all times. And the way that we were producing or executing the catering component, everything was single-use disposable. So once again, we didn't have the risk associated with cross-contamination. And then ordering additional items, because you can imagine you're in quarantine for a period of time. Perhaps you might have a certain food product or an item that you might favour, or you've got a craving, or you just simply want to enjoy the time whilst you're here in a 5-star environment. We did provide them a reduced in-room dining menu as well, just to make sure that if they did want something outside of the meal plan that was being provided, they certainly were able to do so. During the progression, guests were also able to engage in third-party providers if they wished. So that means Uber Eats, Deliveroo, DoorDash were available to the guests in the instance that they wished for a craving for McDonald's or something of a similar nature. We also provided the guests IRD beverage services as well. Now, minibar was extracted out the room, obviously based off the nature of the accommodation, but certainly we did provide them what we stated as a refreshment centre menu. So once again, it was a little slightly reduced offering to the guests, but a minibar style offering on demand. We actually reduced the pricing too. We're really conscious that the guests were going to be in quarantine for a 14-day period. This was a mandate environment that they couldn't option for. And for us in particular, look, it wasn't around, I guess, a profitable exercise. It was about making the guests comfortable at all times too. So we did actually provide them a reduced price refreshment centre menu, very different to a 5-star based environment. The guests, in the instance, if they did request in-room dining, once again, we wanted to make sure we set that clear protocol. So guest services would actually call to collect their credit card details via phone, because if you remember from that first step from the guest arrival experience, it was very manual. So we're more grabbing the guest details rather than understanding a little bit around chargebacks, because the charges for accommodation and the 3 meal lodging are actually provided by government, but the incidentals, in the instance the guest feels like a burger during the evening, would actually be picked up by the guest. So from there, if they wanted to engage in additional services, we would actually obtain their credit card details, and then they open up an account with the hotel. Once their food and or beverage is ready, in-room dining would actually call the guest to advise them that we'll be commencing a delivery shortly, and to expect someone in their room shortly, knock on the door 3 times, and once again to allow 10 seconds before they can collect their food. And again, food and or beverage was served in single-use products, so we did have the risk of cross-contamination. On the screen, you'll see an example meal rotation. So this gives you a bit of an understanding of what meals were provided through those 3 meals per day lodging. The example that we have on the screen is lunch. So once again, you can see so that there's actually a 7-day cycle, and it gives you a little bit of understanding of what the guests were to expect during those periods. Now the in-bag mechanics, to make sure that we could actually continue with single-use plastic, would receive a disposable fork and knife spoon set, salt and pepper sachets, butter portions, and bread rolls as a staple for each meal period, so breakfast, lunch, and dinner. In addition to that, we would adhere to the menu cycle, as you can see on your screen as well. So, there's a combination of your substantial lunch or your main, and then from there, snacks to be able to continue through to the next meal period. We're also conscious of health, so it's really important that we do actually have a balanced meal during that time, and that's important for all. So making sure that we do have whole fruit available to the guests, and additional to that, making sure we provide them fresh water as well. So you can see there's an example picture on the screen there as well, and that was breakfast. The next one, a caterer's nightmare when we talk about dietary requirements. So you can imagine at any given time, I think that the most amount we had to date was around 652 guests in total, and that's including health, the Australian Defence Force, and also police personnel here on site. So quite a large number. And I remind you that each of those meals is actually hand delivered to each door. So it's quite a large scale operation, certainly something for all to see. But with that, there are specific dietary requirements that we needed to adhere to as well. And I think at one stage, we're up to around 180 different dietary requirements that we need to look after for the guest experience. So, it certainly wasn't, well, there can't be that blanket approach, unfortunately, in today's society, because you do have so many different dietary needs, and also religious attributes as well. So, for example, at the moment, we've actually got some quarantine guests here in site, and people who are Muslim are going through Ramadan. So once again, you really need to be cautious of that. So your timings of 8 a.m. for breakfast, 12 p.m. for lunch, 5 p.m. for dinner, no longer adhere to that because they don't actually work within that religious cycle of Ramadan. So once again, you're continuously always evolving to make sure you look after your guest needs. And it's important to make sure you don't lose that human touch as well. So from that, we actually put together a fairly substantial spreadsheet that you can see on the top there as well. And this is just a very, very small snippet of what you would see on a daily catering drop. From there, would have your room details, your PAX number, so the amount of guests that are actually sitting within that room, and also the very standard 5-6 dietary requirements that are within scope, so vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free, dairy-free, halal, diabetic, and also other specifics as well. So there are people that have specific requests or things they just particularly don't like, and we'd actually make note and mention of that too. The way that we've received that feedback, obviously as part of that arrival check-in process, there was a form to fill out would actually specify if they did have any dietaries. Separate to that as well, the continuous communication between guests and in-room dining attendant as well whilst on site. So they would call down and provide us that feedback. And then from there, we'd populate that detail through to this master manifest, and then from there, execute to the 3 meals per day. I guess some fun or making sure that we do look after our guests, and separate to some of the mechanics was around some of the donations and gifts that the hotel actually received to provide to our quarantine guests as well. So everything from book donations, toys, making sure that we actually transfer parcels across as well. So a lot of family members, if they were within local proximity, or potentially they shared across via Australia Post, would ensure that they were delivered up to the guest store as well, to make them feel comfortable during this period. Because as you can imagine, and look, even myself, I'm in hotel rooms quite a bit, it certainly would be hard for most to be confined within a hotel space for a period of 14 days. So it is really essential that we try to accommodate as much as we can during this period of time. Our first wave actually fell through Easter as well. So once again, an important holiday for all. So to be able to celebrate that, the hotel actually put together some Easter goodies for our guests and kids as well, to make sure they could still celebrate the holiday during this experience. And then you've got the various points of communication. So in addition to telephone communications, we have an on-site porthole that actually allows the guests to be able to communicate via device. So once again, when connecting through the Wi-Fi application, guests are actually able to provide immediate feedback to our team here on property. And then from there, we would extract through all those details. And then based off the various requirements and needs, we would communicate that across to the various departments that would be able to support and assist that request. We also track social feedback as well. So Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, making sure that if the guest has actually placed something out, that we'd acknowledge and address that. We had some very interesting feeds during that period of time as well. I remember there was one gentleman that set up an ironing board and created a bit of a DJ application because he wanted to have some fun during that time. And we actually acknowledged that and said, good on you for having a bit of fun during that 14-day cycle. And a lot of people were quite thankful during the period of time as well, which is really lovely to see. And as you can see on the bottom left of the screen, you've got guest notes. And I think the beauty of humanitarianism is the way that people can really evolve and come together during a critical, tough time. So guests writing notes, creatively putting together different signs on their doors as well, to be able to communicate through to our associates to thank them during this period of time, and or provide feedback in the instance there was a request for something that they needed. And then we'd act on that as well. And then you've got the guest birthdays. So I guess once again, really important. We just spoke through an important religious holiday, Easter, for a lot of people, and making sure that we did obviously acknowledge that and celebrate that with them, but also birthdays, as you can imagine. If you're in quarantine during this period of time and it's your birthday, you want to make sure you still feel some sense of normality. So we would actually track guest birthdays and provide personalized cards and or a gift depending on the age of the guest. What I'm going to share with you now is a video that we had actually produced to the guests, and you would have seen as part of that timeline around the guest journey. This was the halfway mark. So what we crafted as a hotel was a bit of a halfway process where the guests would actually receive some messaging from the hotel to make them feel special and valued, but also to make them understand around the operation and that we're with them to support them during this time. We know that it's challenging and tough, and to give them, a light at the end of the tunnel, and that they had an additional 7 days to go. So I'll play it for you now.
Joshua, this is Carla here. I'm sorry, I think the sound is not working, unfortunately.
Oh, right. Okay. Is that working now?
I think still not.
Okay.
Have a link to this? Would this be available outside this presentation? Maybe we can try to make it work.
Yeah, perhaps we might use the imagery. We'll continue to share, and then I'll share across the PowerPoint as a link at a later stage.
Perfect. Yes.
Unless that's okay.
Hi, Joshua, it's Sheridan. Unfortunately, there's still no sound on the video.
Okay, hopefully that worked in the end. Did we hear the music and or messaging?
No,
Were
unfortunately, the audio was not working, but we did enjoy watching the pictures and the video, so we might have a look at it later. That's okay.
Yeah. It was a great
Okay.
video regardless.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'll show you through the link, and there's some various contents there. And I thought we did actually share that across with the guests, and I thought we'd populate that across thread today to give you a bit of an insight and a background to what's been occurring here on property. And you can see some of those dramatic images of all the different bags, and as you can imagine, all the preparation and the requirements when you're doing such a large quantity and count, and all the different hands that go in association to make something of that nature seamless, and certainly a learning for all, and something new to each individual. It's something we've never actually done before. So as you can imagine, there's various teething during that period of time, and it really required that collaboration, that teamwork. So, we had everyone from sales and marketing, finance, HR coming through to assist and support us. Really all hands on deck to be able to ensure that we could execute it. So, from a team bonding perspective, it was actually brilliant in a nature because it really did actually, pull down a lot of those barriers between these areas, that everyone would come together united as one. So from that area there, it was actually quite a beautiful thing to see. And then checkout. So once the guests actually leave us, then you've got the repatriation. So actually returning back through the community. So from there, the guests prior to, so on the day, so day 13 prior to 14, so it's 13 nights, 14 days in total as part of that cycle. They'd actually receive a questionnaire and actually go through a health check and a screening to make sure they're all clear prior to departure. And then from there, they'd actually receive different coloured wristbands to be able to identify that guest to make sure that the person leaving is correct. And part of that correct way prior to departure. And then, as we stated before, it's international travel again. So the final destination might not necessarily be Sydney. So once more, there's a lot of logistics associated there too. So we found interesting enough, and look, personally, I would probably be in that same bracket too if I was from New South Wales and then I landed in New South Wales. As soon as that clock hit 12:01, people would depart. And as you can imagine, being stuck in a hotel for a long period of time, you'd be quite eager. But then a lot of our guests too, if they're from interstate, then there'd be various different requirements, and we get there's a bus arrangement. We leave the hours from 4 a.m. through to 10 a.m. And then from there, it would be, self-arranged to transfer back to the airport to their final destination, whether it be Brisbane, Perth, or the various other areas around Australia as well. There's also those incidentals. So in the instance, the guest had actually ordered anything during that progression, whether it be in-room dining, minibar, or any other services. Once again, we'd actually produce the payment prior to on day 13, and that would all be done electronically and or over phone as well, just to make sure that we had a seamless checkout prior to departure. And then the guests were exited, so they would be escorted down from their various levels to our lobby area, going through a final screening, and on their way back into the community, whether it's back to the airport or back to their homes. And then there's the post-COVID, so the quarantine cleaning protocol. So as you can imagine, interestingly enough, when a guest is in a hotel room for such a long period of time, the fun things that they get up to. So, there was furniture moved, people were quite creative with their spaces, but it certainly did require, a very deep clean during that period of time. So I've just pointed out some of the 5 key touch points that we have a look at. So the waste management in particular is an important thing. So just ensuring once again that we did actually separate. So you've got everything from your single use when we speak about the food trays and cutlery that would be discarded into general waste. And then we also have the towels, linen, and the various other protocols. Now, during that 14-day timeline, on day 8, the guests would actually receive fresh linen because, as you can imagine, when we speak about quarantine, we didn't have daily housekeeping. They would actually be placed in that room until departure. But on day 8, we actually had a self-linen rotation where they would be given fresh linen and we would take that away. But on that final 14th day, once we'd stripped and removed all the linen from that space, it would be separated. And then from there, our provider would actually treat it in a different way to make sure that it was well looked after, and using hospital-grade disinfectant and the various other requirements as well. Upholstery and carpets, once again, as you can imagine, when someone's within a confined space for a 14-day period of time, it will require a deep shampooing, a steam clean of the walls, and depending on the room condition as well, various other needs too. And then sanitizer, which is one of the crucial components again. So, based off our requirements, we would use hospital-grade disinfectant and sanitizer to make sure that the room is returned sanitary and ready for next use. And based off the cycle, we would generally allow 24 hours between the next guest. So at this stage, engaging a quarantine guest, you'd have a 24 cycle before we re-engage that room inventory for the next guest to be able to come through and be able to call that home for that period of 14 days. You can see there's a brief snippet there of some of our associates, some of the housekeepers in a space too. So we're all prepared, ready to go. PPE was to be worn at all times. So in addition to actually the personal protective equipment that we spoke about briefly, which was the goggles, the face mask, and the gloves, housekeeping would take that next step further and making sure that they're protecting their skin as well. So they would actually be wearing what we call a space suit during that period of time. And then we talk about post-COVID. So, Marriott International is certainly a forefront within industry. And I do have a link. Hopefully the verbal will work this time. But if we talk about the cleanliness and some of the requirements within industry progressing forward. So the Global Cleanliness Council has been crafted and curated by Marriott International. And under that umbrella, we've got various standards that are starting to be implemented across the world. And we look at some of the 3 key points, which are surface areas, guest contact, and food safety. And it is really a new way to be able to look at the global market and ensuring that we do have certain protocol and procedures in play. And when we map out that guest experience or the guest journey, as we speak of, it's everything from making sure that we're really across and aware of touch points. So everything from elevators to the arrival. So when the guest is checking in, when they're going up an escalator, or if they're touching a stairwell, all the way through to checking into your room, all the different touch points and the things that we can do progressing forward with the industry to make sure there is minimal contact at each point, that we are actually, condoning and encouraging social distancing at any given time. And also the additional protocol within rooms, so using hospital-grade disinfectant on any key touch points, making sure our linen protocols are adhered to. You can see the gentleman there with a very interesting looking spray gun once again. So really making sure that we do utilise sanitisation to its best potential. And so Marriott International with the Cleanliness Council has started to promote and prompt this movement across the globe, and you'll see a lot changing within the hotel industry. Probably similar to what you've already started to see within supermarkets, which were continuing trade during the COVID-19 pandemic, when you saw screens as you were checking out between the attendant looking after you with payment to make sure that there was some kind of barrier between yourself and the individual providing that service. We're also looking at contactless ways to be able to check in, including swiping into your room as well. So using your device to be able to access your room, be able to make payments and the various other attributes. And moving forward, progressing to that within food as well, with food and beverage service, looking at ways down the future, how we can engage in applications and or different platforms to be able to reduce that contact between the guest and the server. So really making sure we adhere to protocol. You can see food safety is one of the key points there too. So once again, retraining within our spaces to make sure sanitisation, hand washing, and the various other attributes are really ingrained within our culture, which they already are, but it's certainly, once again, a refresher and probably elevating it. So really taking it to that next level, making sure not only are we across and we're continuously adhering to it, we really do scale up when we speak about some of those key points. I'm going to click on this link now. I hope that the voice application will work. If not, it's certainly a good video to watch. We also will share the link across as well. So it's around Marriott International's commitment to clean. Do we see the link popping up now through? I'll just pause it for a moment.
I think we're still on the screen of the presentation or PowerPoint. Maybe we need to stop the sharing and reshare your screen.
Correct, yes. Okay, have we now got the MSN page up?
Yes.
All right, perfect. I'm going to start it from the beginning. Hopefully the video will work. If not, I will send across the link so everyone will be able to see the detail.
Thank you. I believe the audio is still not working, but we enjoyed the video, so we will enjoy the video.
Perfect. Yeah. Luckily, they've applied the text on the bottom, so we'll just read through. Okay, perfect. And that's the end of the presentation. So as you can see, I guess, luckily there was the text underneath, but certainly gives you a bit of an industry insight into some of the ways forward that Marriott International are actually starting to commence that pipeline. And look, dare I say, one of the first within the industry as well to really acknowledge the change and putting that foot forward into a benchmark globally. So as you can imagine, quite a few hotels worldwide to be able to adapt to that. But certainly the important thing is that we keep our guests safe and our associates alike at all times, and we start to reduce that contact as well until we get across this pandemic, and hopefully there's a vaccine in the near future.
Thank you so much. So much insight. We didn't expect this. I mean, we didn't know what to expect, so it's a great learning experience. We're waiting for some of the question. I asked the student to write their question here. While we're waiting for them, I'm actually very curious. Being a parent myself, did you have many kids during this quarantine time?
We actually did. So I think it would test the parental skills, particularly if you're in a shared hotel room for 14 days. So hopefully you love your children. But look, yes, we did during that period. And so I think the particular one was important was Easter. And it's so important for children. They look forward to it, chocolate and celebration. So, thoughts go out to the families. And, I know it was actually, I will share a little bit. Look, it can be, I'm not a parent myself, but I could imagine it certainly can be challenging at times. And so, it was really important that those parents actually had support to be able to reach out to. You can imagine, I think there was a single dad, and I think he had 2 children with him in that one hotel room. A younger child, running around. I think it could certainly test you at stages. And so it was important to make sure that they really did have that communication tool to be able to communicate outwards and stabilize themselves during such a challenging time.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
And what about laundry? If a guest wanted to, had the laundry service, would that be provided during that time?
No, so it was additional to, so we did provide a very reduced laundry service to the guests as well at certain days to make sure, as you could imagine, yes, when you've been traveling during periods of time. And look, I guess the interesting thing is, I think we're up to wave 3 of quarantine guests. We've actually had 3 cycles now. It becomes a little bit more escalated. So what we've seen is with the first cycle, it was a lot of fresh Australians returning back to Australia from their home, their territories where they were internationally, and they probably haven't seen too much disrupt. Whereas wave 2, perhaps they were in a more challenging location to be able to return back, and that's where we saw charter flights. So a lot of places within South America and eastern broad areas of Southeast Asia, where it was a little bit more challenging for them to return back home because remember, international travel has actually ceased globally, so it's quite tough for these people to actually return home. So they may have actually been in quarantine internationally before they've actually returned home to Australia. And I remember there was one story with a gentleman's father actually. So it was a minor, I think he was 17 years of age. And he was obviously very upset with his son because he'd been away. He'd been in quarantine, I think, in a shared accommodation facility abroad, overseas. They had military on the door, so it was quite escalated, perhaps a little scary for someone who's 17 years of age. And then they're returning home to do another round of quarantine. So it can become a little bit edgy, I guess, at a stage. And then we've got stage 3 now as well. So these people have actually gone through quite a bit during their journey.
Can imagine. Ms. Sheridan, would you have any question?
Sure, I can see we have a couple of questions.
Oh, they're coming out. Yeah.
But I did have one question in terms of the media. I'm sure a lot of us have seen quite a lot of, unfortunately, negative press in terms of quarantine hotels. Luckily, I haven't seen too much about the Sheraton, but how did the team, handle that? And in terms of, I guess, the strategy of recovering from that almost negative stigma in terms of, recovery, I mean, what was the strategy?
Yeah, look, definitely. And dare I say, fortunately or unfortunately for us, we weren't the first 5-star hotel to receive quarantine guests. So I think that first hotel probably hit the RAF of it initially, but it's almost become the new norm. And if I can speak outwards, I feel people become now accustomed to this style of service execution, and it has become standard protocol, and people really understand the processes. I think initially for quite a bit of a shock. In relation to, I guess you're right, in relation to communicating outwards and making sure that we are really respectful. A lot of our associates and part of our process obviously is around media training and protocol and making sure what we do communicate outwards is effectively distributed by the right party So it was essential to us, particularly during that time, that in the instance any media personnel did want some insight into the hotel, the operation, and all particulars around our guests, that it was actually referred to the right party. We also do have, privacy compliance, and we need to adhere to at all times and really respect the guests that are in-house during that period too. So I think there were some interesting times actually where we had at one stage for the initial wave, it was all quite new and exciting for all. News reporters commencing work or setting up their filming, on the driveway, obstructing areas, and you'd have to really obviously reach out to them and advise them to be respectful during that period of time. And look, there's no secrets. Everyone was really across and aware of what hotels were producing quarantine-based catering. And it's in association with the government as well. So we're all working together. It's not just the hotel, there's various other providers. There's the government, there's a third-party travel company, there's the military, there's the police, there's the medical support units. There's a lot of people on the ground to make sure that this works. And as you can see actually from the bell curve, look, I'm not the most educated in medical, but you can see that it's going down. So, credit to Scott Morrison here, the strategy's working.
Indeed. We have hope for the future.
Yes, thank God.
Now, before we answer some questions from the students, I think, Joshua, what I see on my screen is still your open tab on after the video. So maybe perhaps unshare your screen and we can see your wonderful face.
Yeah, sure.
On Teams, a little bit larger. Excellent.
Here
All right,
are.
shall we start a bit of the Q&A then?
Do you want me to read some of the questions we shared in?
Sure.
So Lynn is asking, do you have any plan for the hotel related to safety and hygiene for the guests who will travel after coronavirus crisis? Everyone, of course, is worried. I think you covered it a little bit already. I'm not sure if you want to add anything to post-coronavirus crisis.
Yeah, look, definitely. And even with some of our corporate-based traveling segments too, particularly, some of the American-based providers, all around reduced contact. So I guess really echoing when we spoke about some of the Marriott International cleaning protocol that is about to roll out globally. It's all about making sure that we reduce that contact from the guests with associate and touch points to make sure that there is no cross-contamination in a sense. And I think, dare I say, it's about making sure that the cleaning processes and protocols and procedures that are in play are being communicated and being ahead of the time. So even myself, so we're starting to work on strategy post-COVID. What does that look like, and how do we re-engage in business, and what does the new normal look like? So catering and events, as we stated, is a very large part of our business model. A lot of the catering moving forward, with buffets being questioned in the industry during this time, is looking around single-use portioning, so really changing the entire scope of what we would be usually accustomed to, and making sure that all those kind of touch points and procedures are adhered, and once again communicating that back to our clients and our guests alike to make them feel comfortable during that time.
Fantastic, thank you. Another question was it one person per room, or couple were allowed in the same room?
Yeah, no, look, fortunately, and if you get along, couples were allowed to be together, so that's good. So yeah, you want to get along with your couple, right?
Yes, right.
That's your relationship.
Another question from Sarah is, do you think that people will travel less when restrictions are lifted, in fear that they will become sick, or or do you think quite the opposite? Or do you think that travel will be picking up very quickly?
Yeah, look, mixed reviews there. I feel, look, we hope that travel will take off quickly again. And look, even myself as a hotelier, I love travel, and that's why I do what I do. And I'm dying for restaurants and bars to open again. I think, actually, with New South Wales, my understanding, I believe restaurants can have 10 patrons effective from Friday. I've got my partner to start calling around and seeing where we can make a reservation so we can finally get out with some friends and have a good time. But look, I feel there will be a tread with caution approach initially. So once again, it's around really respecting the guests, making them feel comfortable, which is the most essential thing, I feel. So making sure that there is somewhere for them to wash their hands. There is sanitization. They're across the detail. They understand what additional measures and precautions we are taking just to make them comfortable and at ease. And I think once you deliver that correctly and people feel at home within the environment, then we should see travel return. But it will be a different era, I feel. Fortunately or unfortunately, but it certainly there will be a change with a lot of the processes to what we have become accustomed to.
I feel the same.
Yeah.
Another question from Sarah was, and I think you touched base on this already, how long was the room vacant before the housekeeping team went in and do the cleaning? If there was a length of time. We have some line problems, maybe some connection.
Yeah. I don't know. Joshua, are you still there?
I think we lost our guest speaker.
I'll try giving him a call.
Ms. Sheridan, also, I think we need to be mindful because at 1 o'clock classes will start, so we might need to give a little break to students as well. How about if anyone wants to ask a question, please write it in the message box below. We will collect them and send them to Mr. Joshua to have your question answered. We'll stop the recording for now, I think, and then we'll stop the session. We thank him very much. Maybe, Ms. Sheridan, you can extend our gratitude.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. We really do appreciate your attendance. I hope it was really informative. I know I definitely enjoyed it and learned so much about, the ins and outs of the hotel that you don't hear about on the news. And it was so nice to see all of the teams working together and supporting each other and seeing just how resilient the industry is. And I'm sure we'll definitely bounce back once all of this is over. So thank you.
Thanks to you. We'll stop the recording now. And yes, stay safe, everybody. Enjoy your afternoon. Go to class. Have lunch before that.
Thanks, Ms.
Bye
Carl.
for now.
Bye, everyone.